Welcome back, everyone, to the Echoes of Ihsan podcast for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're taking a look at the Sunan Abu Dawud, specifically Book 10, which focuses on game.
Yeah, this book is really fascinating. It gives us this really unique glimpse into the practices and perspectives around hunting in early Islamic society. And what's so cool is that it doesn't just lay down the law. It really delves into the values behind those practices too.
Yeah, it's like we're getting this amazing opportunity to travel back in time and see how these early Muslim communities interacted with nature and with animals in a really, thoughtful way.
Mm.
And one of the first things that really pops out is the way they view dogs. It's kind of complex and maybe even a little contradictory.
You're right there. The Hadith present this balanced view of dogs, recognizing their usefulness, but also expressing some hesitation. And a good example of this is Hadith 2840, narrated by Jabir ibn Abdullah. And in this Hadith, we see the Prophet initially commanding the killing of all dogs.
Whoa, that's pretty intense. What was the reasoning behind that?
Well, it's really important to consider the historical context. Rabies was a big concern back then. And the Hadith even mentions saliva, which was believed to spread the disease. Plus, dogs were often associated with scavenging and uncleanliness in certain cultures.
That makes sense. So it sounds like there were some serious health and hygiene concerns at play.
Exactly. But, there's more to the story than just this initial command to kill all dogs, because later on we see a modification of this ruling, and this new rule restricts the killing to only black dogs.
Okay, so the ruling changed. What do you think was behind that?
Well, it's probably a mix of things. Practical concerns definitely played a role. Maybe they realized that not all dogs pose the same level of threat, and some types could actually be helpful to humans. But I also think it reflects a deeper shift in understanding the role of dogs in society.
It's fascinating to see how these rulings evolved over time, taking into account practical concerns and changing social norms. And speaking of changing norms, let's talk about how the Hadith addressed hunting itself. It wasn't just about catching game, it was about doing it ethically.
Absolutely. You see, the Sunan Abu Dawud gives all these detailed instructions on hunting with dogs and with bows and arrows. But these rules weren't just about bagging an animal. They were about ensuring the hunt was carried out in a way that respected life, minimizing harm, that kind of thing.
That sounds like a very deliberate and mindful approach.
Uh,
So how did those principles actually play out in the Hadiths?
so take Hadith 2841, for example. It stresses the importance of saying Allah's name before releasing trained hunting dogs to chase game. Invoking the divine like that. It really underscores the sanctity of life and acknowledges that even when hunting, we're operating within God's will.
That's a beautiful reminder that even something as seemingly everyday as hunting has a higher purpose.
Right. And the hadith goes on to say that the game is only considered halal if it's killed by the dog and not by another animal. That really highlights the intentionality behind the hunt, ensuring that the hunter is the one who takes the life and it wasn't left to chance or something.
It seems like every detail of the hunt is carefully considered.
Oh, for sure. Another example is Hadith Tuna 842. This one adds another layer of ethics by saying that the dog shouldn't eat from the prey. This reinforces the idea that hunting is for sustenance, not for the dog's benefit. It's about respecting the animal even after it's been killed.
It's incredible how even the dog's actions are taken into account to make sure the hunt stays focused on providing food for people.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the value of the animal's life and doing everything possible to minimize any unnecessary suffering.
And this meticulous attention to detail continues even further, right?
Mm.
What about Hadith 2843, the one about finding the game after a day, with only the arrow mark, no other dog involvement, and no stench?
Yeah, that one is really interesting. It deals with those times when a hunter might not actually see the animal die right away. So the only evidence is the arrow mark, which shows that the hunter's shot was the likely cause of death. And by making sure there are no other dogs around or any signs of scavenging, well, that just ensures the animal didn't suffer unnecessarily.
It's amazing how every little detail, from invoking Allah's name to checking the game upon recovery, it's also thoughtfully laid out and ethically driven.
I know. It really points to this worldview where even everyday activities are approached with awareness and intention, recognizing that all beings are connected. And we have this responsibility as humans to treat all of creation with respect.
It's a perspective that has so much to offer us even today, as we navigate our own relationship with the natural world and try to figure out how to live ethically.
Couldn't agree more. These ancient teachings, they're rooted in a specific time and place, but they offer these timeless insights into the human condition and our role on this planet.
It's so true. This has definitely given us a lot to think about, and I think it's a perfect place to pause and reflect on everything we've explored so far than the Sunan Abu Dawud's guidelines on hunting.
It really makes you think about the impact of even the smallest actions. And we see this theme of responsibility throughout all these guidelines. Like, the hadith really focus on minimizing harm.
It's like they're encouraging hunters to be super aware, not just of what they're doing, but why they're doing it and what the consequences could be. And, that idea of minimizing harm, it really stands out to me.
You're right, it's central to these teachings. And the hadith go into specific examples to illustrate how this principle works in practice. So there's Hadith 2844. It talks about what happens if an animal is shot, but then grounds.
Oh, wow. That's a tough situation. So what's the ruling in a case like that?
Well, according to the hadith, if the animal drowns after being shot, it's not permissible to eat it.
So even though the hunter's arrow was the initial cause, wasn't the direct cause of death. Interesting.
Yeah. It suggests this understanding that even when we try our best, things don't always go as planned. Nature is unpredictable, and we have to accept that we can't control every outcome.
Right. It's like a reminder to focus on what we can control our own actions and to acknowledge the limits of our power.
And this idea of limited control, it comes up again in Hadith 2845. This one deals with a hawk eating from the prey.
Oh, that reminds me of the rule about dogs not being allowed to eat from the prey. Are hawks treated differently?
Actually, yes, there is a difference. Hadith 2845 says it's okay to eat game caught by a trained hawk, even if the hawk has eaten from it.
That seems kind of contradictory to the ruling on dogs. What could explain that?
I think it might have to do with the nature of the animals themselves. Hawks are birds of prey. Their instinct is to eat their catch right away. It's just how they're wired. And the ruling seems to take that natural instinct into account.
So while the principle of minimizing harm is still there, it's balanced with the recognition that different animals behave in different ways.
Exactly. It shows how much thought went into understanding the animal world. It's not just a bunch of hard and fast rules. It's a set of guidelines that are sensitive to the specific needs and behaviors of each creature.
This nuanced approach is really fascinating.
Yeah.
And it reminds us that ethics can be pretty complicated. There's so many layers to consider. And the hadiths provide this framework for thinking through those ethical dilemmas.
Absolutely. And that framework goes beyond the interaction between hunter and prey. It extends to the animal's well-being even before the hunt itself. Like in Hadith 2852, it talks about how animals should be treated before slaughter.
That's an important topic, especially these days when animal welfare is such a big concern. What does the hadith say about that?
Well, it states that any part of an animal that's cut off while it's still alive is considered dead meat.
That's pretty clear. It emphasizes the importance of a quick and humane death.
Exactly. It's about respecting the animal's life even in those final moments and avoiding unnecessary suffering.
It's a principle that has implications way beyond hunting. It connects all kinds of contemporary issues about how we treat animals, whether it's on farms and labs or anywhere else.
For sure. It's about showing compassion and recognizing the inherent worth of all living beings, whether they're useful to us or not.
It's amazing to me how these ancient teachings continue to spark these really important conversations about ethics and responsibility.
And sometimes those conversations involve grappling with the different interpretations of the hadiths themselves, because there are cases where the hadiths seem to offer contrasting views.
That's interesting. Can you give us an example?
Well, remember how we talked about Hadith 2845, where it's allowed to eat game even if a trained hawk has eaten from it?
Uh-huh.
Well, then there's Hadith 2846, narrated by Abu Talaba al-Kushani. This hadith says that it's okay to eat game caught by a dog even if the dog has eaten from it.
But doesn't that contradict the earlier ruling in Hadith 2842, which said it's not okay to eat game if the dog has eaten from it?
It does seem that way on the surface. And this is where the complexity of interpreting religious texts comes into play, because it reminds us that even within a shared tradition, there's room for diverse viewpoints, and different scholars might emphasize certain aspects over others.
So sometimes it's not about finding the one right answer. It's more about engaging in this deep, thoughtful process of understanding.
Exactly. It's about being open to multiple perspectives and recognizing the richness and nuance within these teachings.
This open-endedness is actually really refreshing.
Yeah.
It encourages us to approach these texts with humility and to be willing to wrestle with the difficult questions.
Absolutely. It's a process of ongoing learning and growth. And by exploring these different interpretations, we actually come to a deeper understanding of the values and principles at play.
This has been such an insightful conversation. It's amazing how much we can learn from these ancient texts about ethics, responsibility, our place in the natural world.
Yeah.
It's not just about rules and regulations. It's about something much bigger.
I agree. And as we move towards the end of Book 10, we see this interesting shift in focus. It's like a subtle warning against getting too caught up in hunting or any worldly pursuit for that matter.
Oh, wow. So we're going beyond the specifics of hunting practices and getting into more philosophical territory.
Exactly. The final hadiths in this book, hadiths 2853, 2854, and 2855, they offer this thought-provoking conclusion to the discussion on hunting.
What kind of message are they sending?
Well, they seem to caution against becoming too absorbed in worldly pleasures, even activities that are considered halal, like hunting. If we let those things consume us, we risk neglecting our spiritual growth.
So even something permissible can become a problem if it throws our lives out of balance.
That's the key takeaway. It's all about balance. Hadith 2853, narrated by Abdullah ibn Abbas, warns that those who are constantly chasing after game risk becoming negligent. It's like this powerful metaphor for how pursuing worldly things can distract us from what truly matters.
It's so relevant to our lives today. We're constantly bombarded with messages about success and achievement.
Yeah.
And it's easy to lose sight of our spiritual goals in all that noise.
It is. And the hadiths remind us that while it's natural to engage with the world, we need to be careful not to let those worldly pursuits define us. True fulfillment comes from nurturing our spiritual side as well.
It's about finding that sweet spot between our worldly responsibilities and our spiritual aspirations. But how do we actually do that? How do we make sure our pursuit of worldly things doesn't overshadow our spiritual growth?
That's a question that people have been wrestling with for centuries. And the hadith don't give us a step-by-step guide, but they do encourage us to look inward, to become more self-aware, and to make sure our actions match our values.
So it's about constantly checking in with ourselves, right?
Right.
Making sure our priorities are straight and that our worldly pursuits aren't leading us away from our spiritual path.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between living in this world and taking care of our spiritual needs. And Hadith 2854 really speaks to that. It warns about the dangers of getting caught up in worldly power.
Yeah, you know how power and status could be so tempting, but they often come with a price. This hadith is reminding us to be careful not to lose ourselves in that pursuit.
It is. It's like a reminder to stay grounded in our faith and our values, and to remember that real fulfillment doesn't come from worldly achievements, but from aligning ourselves with something bigger than ourselves.
So how do we do that?
Yeah.
How do we cultivate that inner alignment and make sure our worldly pursuits don't take over?
Well, it takes effort. It's a journey of self-discovery. One practical thing we can do is try to be more mindful in our daily lives, like taking time for prayer meditation, connecting with nature, doing acts of service, things that bring us closer to the divine.
It sounds like it's about making space in our busy lives for things that nourish our souls.
Exactly. Finding those anchors that keep us steady amidst all the distractions. And it's not just about what we do as individuals, surrounding ourselves with people who share our values. That's important too.
Right. Having that support system can make a big difference. It's like having a group of friends who can encourage you and keep you accountable and remind you of what's truly important.
It's so true. Now, as we wrap up this deep dive into the Sunan Abu Dawud, I want to leave you with this question. How can you stay connected to your values and your purpose in a world that's constantly pulling you in different directions? What steps can you take to cultivate that sense of balance and make sure your worldly pursuits don't eclipse your spiritual growth?
That's a powerful question. And it's one that we should all be asking ourselves. As we conclude our exploration of Book 10, it feels like we've uncovered so much wisdom, not just about hunting practices, but about living an ethical and meaningful life.
It's been an incredible journey, hasn't it? From those very specific guidelines about hunting with dogs and bows and arrows, to those broader principles of intentionality, respect for life, minimizing harm. It's just amazing how much we can learn from these teachings.
And what's truly remarkable is how relevant those teachings are even today. These ancient wisdoms, they still speak to us, offering valuable lessons for how we interact with nature, with animals, with each other.
Absolutely. Like that emphasis on intentionality. It reminds us that our actions have meaning. They're not just empty gestures. And the way the Hadith talk about treating animals with care, even in the context of hunting, it shows us the importance of recognizing the worth of all living beings.
And those warnings about getting too caught up in worldly pursuits, they're so important for us to hear today, especially in a world that's so focused on material success and social status.
You're so right. These lessons, they transcend time and culture. They get to the heart of what it means to live a good life.
They really do. Well, as we come to the end of this deep dive, I want to encourage you to reflect on what you've heard today. What stood out to you? What insights will you carry with you? How can these teachings inspire you to live with more intention, compassion, and balance?
What a beautiful way to wrap up our exploration of the Sunan Abu Dawud, Book 10. I hope this journey has left you with a deeper appreciation for the interconnectedness of all things and for the timeless wisdom that we can find in these ancient traditions.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this deep dive into the world of early Islamic hunting practices. We'll see you next time on the Echoes of Ihsan podcast.